Laos is a landlocked country at the heart of Southeast Asia, and it has a dubious record to its name. Laos is the most bombed country in the world. In the 1960s and 70s, the US Air Force flew more than 500,000 missions over Laos and dropped hundreds of millions of bombs. But all of this had to be done in secret.
I want to make it clear to the American people and to all the world that all we want in Laos is peace, not war.
There are no American combat forces in Laos. We do have perhaps some other activities. I won't discuss those other activities at this time.
Laos was first occupied by an overseas power in 1893. The capital at that time was ransacked by the Chinese Black Flag Army. The French came to the rescue of the king and started acknowledging Laos as their protectorate. The French were interested in gaining control over the Mekong River, which forms a large part of its western border with Thailand. The river is a crucial trade route from Western China to Southeast Asia. During World War II, the French managed to keep control over some of their protectorates. Only in the closing days of the war, the Japanese occupied Laos for a short period of time. This lasted until they surrendered in 1945. Laos regained its independence after a bloody war against the French. Around this time, Vietnam was split into the Communist North and the Western-backed South. Cambodia and Laos saw the start of a civil war between similar political ideologies. The Cold War had started. Laos feared a similar conflict as in Vietnam, but in 1962 they reached a landmark agreement. The leaders from Laos, the United States, Soviet Union, and 12 other countries signed an agreement that recognized the neutrality of Laos. Any of these countries were forbidden to invade Laos or to conduct military operations.
When he met Khrushchev in 1961, the one thing they agreed on was not to let Laos become an active theater of war. These agreements provided for a neutral Laos governed by a coalition of 3 princes.
As part of the neutrality agreement, a government was formed with pro-American, pro-communist, and neutral parties. This didn't end the war. Instead, it was the beginning of a secret war in Laos.
The security of all Southeast Asia will be endangered if Laos loses its neutral independence. Its own safety runs with the safety of us all, in real neutrality, observed by all.
But almost immediately, all parties broke the agreement in one way or another. The Communist Party had control over significant parts of the country. They were secretly supported by the Soviet Union, North Vietnam, and other communist allies. Many of the military supplies of North Vietnam entered through these territories of Laos. The military operations of Vietnam continued in Laos, but now secretly. The Soviet Union, China, and other communist allies continued providing financial and military support, and the US started a secret bombing campaign.
The official estimate is that about 1 out of every 4 Laos has been a refugee.
They say that the planes came over all the time, shot at everything. People, cows, buffaloes, houses, rice fields, schools.
The main priorities of the US Air Force were to take out the supply chains from the Chi Minh Trail. They carried out these operations from Thailand, and they dropped enormous numbers of cluster bombs over these regions. Over a period of 9 years, more bombs were dropped in Laos than during the entirety of World War II. Most of which were cluster bombs, which are infamously imprecise. They result in widespread destruction, often with many civilian casualties as a result. But perhaps worst of all is that about a third of these bombs didn't explode. The US dropped an equivalent of a plane load of bombs every 8 minutes, 24 hours per day, 9 years long. About 80 million bombs didn't detonate. These bombs are now scattered across the country and cause casualties to this day. Some of these areas, most notably Saipan, were very difficult to target from the sky. The village was on the crossroads of 3 major highways leading into Vietnam. It was controlled by the communists, and the region was defended with all sorts of anti-aircraft guns. Meanwhile, the Communist Party was growing in popularity, and they controlled much of these lands. They received support from North Vietnam, the Soviets, and their allies. The US also needed an ally on the ground. They found them in the Hmong communities. The Hmong originated in China and lived in the remote mountains of Laos. They had been at odds with the rest of the country for centuries, and they welcomed ties with the West. The CIA started training a secret Hmong army and provided them with the right weapons to combat the communist government. The war and the bombing continued for 19 years. 1/10 of the population died in the war, and twice as many were wounded. A full quarter of the entire population became refugees. The millions of undetonated bombs are still scattered across Laos. The Communist Party eventually won the power of government and the US retreated. In 2013, the US had spent $118 million in cleanup efforts, which is a little less than they spent every 10 days in the 9 years of bombing Laos.
I also know that the remnants of war continue to shatter lives here in Laos. Many of the bombs that were dropped were never exploded. Over the years, thousands of Laotians have been killed or injured. Farmers tending their fields, children playing. And that's why, as president, I've dramatically increased our funding to help remove these unexploded bombs. So today, I'm proud to announce a historic increase in these efforts. The United States will double our annual funding to $90 million over the next 3 years to help Laos expand its work.
This kind of spending is painfully insulting. Less than 1% of undetonated bombs have been cleared, and we need a whole lot more to make up for history.